Hey guys, you can now support this show and make your life 50% better by going to patreon.com/thesystemisdown and signing up for the Downers Club, where you're going to get access to a plethora of wild, crazy, and often offensive bonus audio and video episodes of the show on a weekly basis. For more information, just go to patreon.com/thesystemisdown. The following is a Goulash Media production. goulashmedia.net. Today's episode is sponsored by the 29 Toes podcast. If at any point during this episode you find yourself a little too uncomfortable and triggered, you can head over to 29toes.com and kind of decompress your brain a little bit, where they're just having casual, laid-back, fun, funny conversations about things that are going on in their lives, in the world, things in media and entertainment, all that fun stuff. So check them out at 29toes.com or wherever podcasts are sold.
Welcome to the System is Down.
What's up, Downers? Welcome back to the least comfortable show on the web. You know what it is. You know the name and the place. It's The System is Down, where we talk about all the uncomfortable topics, the things that might trigger you, the things that might get your panties in a wad, the things that need to be discussed but seldom are because of their uncomfortable nature, things like conspiracies, politics, and religion. And if you're new here, go find the person who invited you, give them a big #MeToo, kiss on the mouth, and a slap on the rear from me, because I appreciate you being here, of course, and from you, because I think you're really going to enjoy today's conversation. And if you're one of the many people that tune into the show every single Monday morning for your weekly dose of discomfort, welcome back. Always a pleasure to have you. Today's episode is my conversation with the great Joey Svendsen, who is not only a pastor, but he is one of the co-hosts of the BadChristian podcast and the main host of the Pastor with No Answers podcast. He's also an author, and he does a whole bunch of fascinating things, and he's got a great story that I can really relate to. I feel like we had similar upbringings personally, coming from Pentecostal Christian backgrounds, very fundamentalist, and coming to different conclusions in our life. The difference is that he has depression, and he's fought OCD his whole life, and all sorts of fun stuff that makes for this perfect storm that has been his life. But it was a great conversation, and we're going to jump into it here in about 35 seconds. Before we do, I got to remind you guys to go please join the Downers Club. You can do that by going to patreon.com/thesystemisdown and signing up for as little as a cup of coffee a month. That is $5 only a month, and you'll get our whole catalog of bonus audio and video content that we do every single week, often multiple times a week. So go check that out. Help keep the show getting bigger and better, more beautiful as we move into the 2019 year that will be better than 2018, we can all hope. So patreon.com/thesystemisdown. Go check it out. All right. Here's my conversation with the great Joey Svendsen. Let's get weird. My guest today is pastor, podcaster, and author Joey Svendsen. Joey, how's it going, man?
Good, man. Good. I have been podcasting literally all day.
Yeah, what else do you have going on?
I did an interview with someone. It was super interesting. The podcast was called "The Bible Says What?" ? And I had no idea what it was about, where the host was coming from. So we were talking about spirituality, the Bible, and all that stuff. Come to find out, I was thinking that I was offending him by my progressive theology, and all along, he is a deconstructed, completely Christian who is now an atheist who was offended. He wasn't offended by my spiritual beliefs, but it was really interesting to not know
you weren't progressive
where he was
enough
coming
for him.
from. Right. And then I recorded like 3 or 4 BadChristian episodes. So it's been a podcasting day. Yep.
Well, nice. Thank you so much for working this into your busy schedule. We've been talking about it for almost a year now, but glad we finally pegged down a time. It's great. But yeah, I read your book, and that's the main reason I wanted to have you on the show to discuss. And I know that I feel like a lot of our childhood was very similar to each other and had a lot of similar results. Mine not nearly to the extreme of yours after reading your book.
Yeah.
But
what are you trying to say, man?
I think you know. I think you've read it. You know what's in
Right.
there. But I told my wife last night, I was like, this book is like, in a good way, the most cringe-inducing thing I've ever read in my life, and it's fantastic. I loved it. It was very, very good and easy read. So let's just start from the beginning. Like, I always like to get people's background, their upbringing. Tell everybody like where you were as a childhood growing up, and like what your family structure and dynamic was.
Yeah. I mean, ever since I could remember, I was being raised to have spiritual lenses of some sort, because by the time I was old enough to remember, my parents had had a genuine conversion. It initially started when we were in the Catholic Church. And so I remember kind of my parents being a little uneasy with Catholicism, but they didn't want to make a quick jump, so to speak. But I mean, for people that aren't familiar with Catholicism, there's definitely a legalistic side of it, and yet the legalism doesn't really come from the Bible, because you're not really reading the Bible either. But
Sure.
that's when a lot of crazy notions, I think, started to take place. Like, I'll give you one example, and that was that I remember feeling obligated to tell my dad when he asked me who I thought was the most beautiful woman in the world, and he's got his arm around my mom, thinking that it was an easy answer.
Right.
And I said, well, Mom, except for the Virgin Mary. And I really felt like that was my obligation to say that. Like,
Sure.
I felt like I would be disobeying God by not saying that. So that was how I started looking at the world spiritually, just through a legalistic viewpoint. And then when they started looking for other churches, we went the pendulum swung in the opposite direction, and we were in Pentecostalism. But unfortunately, the legalistic pendulum did not swing at all, and probably just got a little bit deeper and thicker. And next thing you know, I'm constantly thinking about being assured of my salvation, scared of hell, and all of that. And I would say that I haven't been free from all of that maybe for about 5 years, maybe.
Yeah. Pentecostal here. Dad was a pastor and everything.
Yeah.
Well, I was Pentecostal, but similar upbringing. But with the legalism, was that instilled in you by your folks? Like, did that come from the spirituality, or I know you had like OCD and all that, but were they dogmatic about their faith, or was that just a result of your mental state?
Yeah, well, interestingly enough, my parents did contribute to that, but I don't see them in a negative light, because they were just going through the motions with what they were learning at the time as well. Sure. And if anything, they were seen as kind of rebellious in our church circles, because they let my brother and I listen to Christian metal and things with a beat. They let my brothers my parents let my brother have long hair, and, we could do different things with our fashion, and some of that stuff was really looked down upon. So, on one hand, maybe my parents brought a healthy element into all of it, but my mom read the book and definitely felt burdened, and even articulated, I feel like some of this is my fault. And even though I know there's some truth to that, I don't see it in that way. And I've told her specifically, I was like, Mom, your mothering, I don't see in any other light but positive. So Absolutely. You're just going to have to get that out of your head. But no, I wasn't allowed to listen to secular music, wasn't allowed to see any movies beyond PG, and, all those sorts of things. So yes, there was and then I was in a ministry drama team at my youth group, and we actually had a contract that we had to sign promising that we wouldn't listen to secular music, watch PG-13 movies. We had a curfew. And so, I just embedded in a legalistic culture my whole childhood. So,
Fun stuff.
Yeah. Fun stuff, man.
Yeah. And in your book, you talk about just the OCD stuff, just tearing you apart, basically, over and over again. Like you said, just freaking out about spirituality. I don't think I had any OCD or anything, but worrying about salvation on a regular basis, and that being an unhealthy state.
Yeah, and I think the mental illness exaggerated those sorts of things. I mean, how I articulate it to people is the mental illness takes what is already on the forefront of your mind and makes it feel more urgent, more severe, more problematic. So where some people would maybe have like and I've got the quote fingers up, like a natural fear of their eternal soul, mine turned very OCD from a standpoint of when I asked God to save me, I needed to write it down. And then if I ever was convinced that that actually didn't happen, I would refer to that piece of paper and say, well, it had to have happened because I wrote it down. And then I would put a check mark on it. But then sometimes I could be convinced that all of that was a sham, and I'd have to throw that piece of paper away and kind of start all over. And then, sometimes I'd be convinced that I wasn't even awake when I said it, or I wasn't sincere, or I didn't address God appropriately. And I said Jesus, I should have said God. I said God, and I should have said Jesus, or I didn't really mean it. And so I think that's where the OCD parts came into, where I explained that to somebody else and they're like, my gosh, that sounds crazy. And I'd be like, yeah, it was very crazy.
Literally. Yeah.
Right.
But yeah. And in the Pentecostal realm, I'm a very not emotional person. I listen to your podcast and stuff. You seem like you're more emotional than I am, and easier to get into that side of things. But for me, I had big issues with the fact that everything was about feeling. Everything was about different emotions. I can't like that bothered me as a child. I can't even imagine like having OCD. Like having all that with emotional height on top of everything, and then feeling like you have to say things a certain way for them to actually, have any meaning to the creator. Right.
It was absolutely crippling. I mean, there's no other way to put it. Now, I am happy to say that when I look back on my childhood and teenage years and college years, I don't see it as like an altogether rotten mess, because I thank the Lord I had a healthy household in which my parents loved me. We went on vacations. They spent time with us, and I had a great brother and all of that. But, I have definitely spent some time now as an adult mourning what was lost through all of that bondage. Like I literally feel like there was a lot that was robbed of me, such as just a normal 4 years of high school. Right. I couldn't engage in relationships normally. Like a few examples are, if I'm in a circle of dudes and someone says an inappropriate joke, I felt compelled to have a frown on my face, because if I fed into that joke and smiled, then I lost my witness and
frowning for Jesus
was accountable. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So, like, what was kind of your vision of God? Like, how did you perceive God at this point in your life? I mean, it couldn't have been anything personal except for like, just wrath.
It's interesting because I think that as an adult reflecting on that, maybe the best way of putting it was that God did love me, but he was constrained through a particular system that even he had to work within. So, for example, what was so troubling to me is I was just like any other human being that was trying to have faith in something, which meant I lacked it often. But then when I read the Bible and I read that you receive Jesus through faith, I'm like, well, I'm lacking faith, so I obviously haven't been able to receive Jesus. And then that circle just kept repeating over and over. So I didn't see God necessarily as like an angry, pissed off God that wanted to send me to hell, as much as I saw salvation and faith and all of that as like a formula that him and I were working within. And I remember coming to some revelations, which I would imagine would be God saying, dude, you got to get out of this. And one time I realized, again, I think it was God. It was basically, dude, there's no such thing as trying to ask me for salvation. You don't try. You either do or you don't. Like, I'm everywhere. I hear you. I'm omniscient. I'm omnipotent. I'm omnipresent. I got this covered. So if you're saying something to me, you don't need to second guess your intentions or anything. I already know all of that. You cannot try to ask for something. And that actually brought me a good bit of peace. Like, well, yeah, that even logically makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, how early in life did you start to, did you have these thoughts, like these OCD obsessive thoughts and actions, and was that anywhere presenting itself outside of the faith stuff? Like, I mean, you hear about people who like feel like they have to turn the light switch on and off 5 times before they leave the room, or their mom will die or something like that. Was there anything like that, or was it mostly just on faith?
Oh man, I wish I could say that it did, but honestly, I did do the light switching stuff, but it was kind of revolving around the number 7. And it was revolving around the direction of up instead of down, like towards heaven instead of towards hell. There were just all sorts of rituals in my head, and I would venture to guess that it was probably all related to spirituality. Yeah, I can't really think of ways in which it was not related to that.
Yeah, which, I mean, if spirituality is, overwhelming and overshadowing your entire life as much as it sounds like it was, I mean, you probably can't even remember anything outside of spirituality in any way.
And I mean, and it all boils down to if there's like this eternal torture chamber that people are consciously burning forever, then honestly, it's worth the OCD. It's worth the irrational approach and making sure and putting yourself through that hell on earth. Well, at least you get to avoid hell. Right. And I just, I think that's why I'm so cautious not to try and spoon feed my kids in a particular, I'll rephrase that. I am very intentional with never communicating anything about God to my kids that's fear-based, because I don't think there's anything to be afraid of. Sure. And there are some fear notions that some of my kids have picked up on, and I have no idea where. And the only thing I could imagine is just the general notions of evangelicalism, given I pastor one of those churches, and they hear stuff from the teachers that I legitimately oversee. And so I don't feel like it's something that I need to abandon altogether, but I do feel like I need to be very intentional in my conversations with them. Like, one of my kids one time lamented on how her faith was just not where it needed to be, and she was afraid. And I said, listen, if the God that we believe in exists, then he does not want you to toil with that. So stop. No fear. You don't need, if you don't have faith, you don't have faith. And God still loves you, and he's going to take care of you. And one day maybe you will have, but it's just like, and part of it too is just like, gosh, how tragic is it that so many kids, me being one of them, that was confronted with some of these deeper, in my opinion, faulty, but deeper spiritual truths that were so scary. I mean, it's just like, I want to tell people, just let your kids play hopscotch and be on their iPhones and watch TV and play with their friends, man. Don't scare them.
Right. Yeah. And
but then again, it all goes back to, if you believe in the traditional heaven and hell, then all of it's worth it. You better damn well indoctrinate your kids.
Right. Yeah, I get that. And, I've been asked the question many times on our forum and on our show and stuff like that, whether or not teaching your children about hell is child abuse. Because, and I've said the same thing. Like, if you believe that it's real, then you'd be abusing your child not to teach them about hell. But if it's not real, then maybe making them live in fear is. I don't really have an answer, because I can't confirm or deny whether or not hell exists 100%. So, what's your take on that?
On whether or not it exists?
Well, yeah, and whether or not it's child abuse, I suppose, if you think it doesn't.
I mean, I would agree with your rationale. It is definitely not child abuse if it's real. And I would even go so far as to say, you know what, if a parent suspects that it could be real, then I don't blame them for trying to indoctrinate. It just so happens that for me, and this is not someone speaking, and you know, I understand where people are coming from, and I understand that a lot of people will write me off as a heretic and obviously making my own rules and straying away from the Bible, but I'll still put it out there how I see it. This is not coming from a person who has stopped talking to God, who has stopped seeking him, who has lost a peace that passes all understanding. Like I have access to this. And again, some people could say, well, yeah, it's a faulty access. You're not really hearing from the Lord because you're not believing correctly. But I am fully convinced that the concept of hell and people being tortured forever just does not make sense. It doesn't make logical sense. It doesn't make sense in light of God. It doesn't make sense in light of Scripture. I mean, there's a podcast that I've listened to called Rethinking Hell, and Chris Date would destroy anybody in a debate in the concept of annihilationism over eternal conscious torment. I mean, and he'll take it verse by verse. Any verse that you can think of to throw his way, he will give you a very thorough, detailed explanation. A lot of it has to do with Old Testament prophecy and the words that they're using in the New Testament. They're just assuming you know what these mean. And so his whole basis is, no, people aren't tortured forever. They're destroyed forever. That's what eternal punishment means, is you are forever gone. Now, I feel like there's some verses that lend some credibility to Jesus being the hero of every person who's ever lived. I don't think I have fully fledged bought into that, but I definitely think that there is a possibility that that is the case. I'm hopeful, like I would call myself a hopeful universalist, but also reading, the Bible pretty carefully, it's definitely not a shoe-in for that by any means. Yeah. But I am so beyond worried about hell and friends of mine going to hell and family and my kids and all of that. I just
don't care about them anymore, right?
It just does. Yeah. It just does not make any sense, man.
That's on them.
Yeah. There you go.
Yeah. In the book you talked about, you gave a bunch of different examples of stories of this crazy spiral that you were on, where you felt like, if you didn't go to school and wear witness wear, which is like, the cheesy Christian T-shirts, you could be responsible for somebody's soul and somebody going to hell. Dig into that a little bit.
There's a verse that kept me further imprisoned, and that was, I think it's in James, where it says, to know the good things to do and not to do them is sin. So what that did is, not only did I feel guilty about the bad things that I did and felt like I needed to repent for those, but I was also constantly thinking about the stuff that I hadn't done that I needed to do. Stuff as trivial as, I don't know if I put this in the book or not, but I was helping my boss move his art gallery from one location to another. And one thing that I was carrying was like a glass shelf. And I remember nicking the corner of it on the edge of the building and being like, oh my gosh. And it was pretty insignificant, but at the same time, I was like, I probably need to tell him. But for some reason, I just didn't tell him. And then weeks go by, and finally I get to the point where it's nagging at me, but I was like, well, now it's going to sound insane if I say, hey, that time we moved, literally it's like a year gone by. That time we moved a year ago, I accidentally chipped a little piece of glass off the shelf. But I felt like that sin will be on me until I do that, because it's like ongoing sin, because I'm continually not doing the right thing, so it's continually on me, and that's the only way to get rid of it. And even before moving beyond a lot of this sort of theology that I bought into, I even realized the senselessness of that, and that if the grace of God was real, then that means that it's all of God's doing. Salvation is, and it's none of our doing. So I was able to wrestle that one down fairly early in all of this.
I was going to ask, like, when you're having these thoughts about yourself and whether or not it meant that you were a bad person for not owning up to every single tiny little thing in your entire life, and that might mean you're going to hell. Was there anybody in your life where you're like, obviously that person's not going to hell? I mean, I can't imagine thinking in the way that you were, but I also can't imagine that you could look around and not see how bad everybody else is and think, you know, everybody's going to hell. If the world blew up right now, then nobody would be safe because they're not constantly repeating these prayers over and over again.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting. I mean, a couple of things there is, as an adult now, I can look back and realize how silly this was, but I was definitely under a delusion that everyone that put their hands in the air and clapped their hands at church and said kind things about God, they were totally legit, 100% living for the Lord, did not have any sins in their closet or anything. I felt like, okay, these are the people that do it right. And this is obviously who I need to aspire to be like. And then my dad, he had gone through a lot of the mental, spiritual trauma that I was undergoing. And so he was able to walk me through certain things. And, you know, honestly, I feel like he ended up at a place that I have moved beyond, and I don't mean beyond as far as I'm more informed than him, but you know, he really did camp out on some very simple promises in the Bible that I feel has been good for him and probably God's intent, such as the simplicity of ask and you shall receive. You know, for him, it was just like, look, it's not complicated. If I ask God to save me, he's going to save me. Where I think I have kind of, I'll still hang on to that a little bit, but I've just moved beyond that from the standpoint of, my gosh, there's so many things I don't understand. I don't know what this means or what that means. I can kind of suspect what this or that means, and I do get something out of Scripture, but then there's always a second guess as to, you know, is this really from God? Was Paul really inspired? And just all this stuff, to where I really lean on my personal communion with God. And again, I understand what Christians would do with that. They'd say, well, if that's detached from the Bible, you can't trust it. And I understand that, but I would also implore people to understand that this is coming from someone who has, at least in my own way, been seeking God for 35 years. I mean, ever since I was in the single digits. And a lot of it was rooted in fear, and there was never this time where I put my middle finger up to God and said, okay, screw this, I'm out of here. Like there was always a diligence in seeking him, seeking freedom, seeking truth. And here I am, and there's no going back, and I cannot express the peace that I feel. And it's like, if I were to try to reel it in and go back to an evangelical fundamentalist sort of point of view, I could literally just feel myself going against the Spirit. And so maybe I'm deceived. And, you know, as far as my upbringing, obviously, and I've talked about this on Bad Christian before, there's that tiny, tiny, tiny little piece of me that's just like, what if I am just classically backslidden? Sure. I have turned from the truth. My heart is hardened, and I am going to be punished forever and ever. And there's just no way.
I mean, we were warned about it. We were warned, like, it's going to be easy. It's just going to happen one day when you start listening to these things and watching these things. Suddenly, you're going to think like the world, and you're going to be of the world if you don't follow these rules. And of course,
And so the only thing I would say to that is, if that's the case, then the enemy is literally pawning himself off as the God of all comfort, which it seems like the Bible warns against that as well. But then I would say, you know what? If God would allow that to happen to someone who only wanted to do what's right, who even served God, believing in the concept of hell, and surrendered everything, and had nights of turmoil and pain and suffering and just wanting to do what's right and wanting to be in the right place, and then he allows an enemy to steer me in the wrong direction, then, I mean, what am I to do with that? I mean, there's nothing I can do. Then I would say God is part of the evil side for allowing that to happen, and we're just all screwed.
Yeah,
I mean,
absolutely.
There's no way to look at it.
Yeah, if you can do every single thing in your power and still fall, well, I mean, we still fall short, but and still like fall short enough that he's like, well, you didn't do good enough because you believed. You believed one. You didn't interpret these words exactly how I said. So
exactly. I mean, imagine
that's on you, man.
Right. Exactly. Imagine my son constantly on his tippy toes saying, "Dad, all I want to do is please you, and this is genuine. It's from the heart. Like, I'm scared that you're going to punish me, and all I want to do is do what's right." But then, because he was thinking the wrong stuff, I just dismissed his effort, dismissed his intentions, dismissed his motivation, and just said, yeah, sorry, you're not thinking correctly.
And Ed, on top of that, you imagine you actually created his brain from nothing and gave him those thoughts.
Right. Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah, it's interesting for sure.
Yeah.
So, what else we got here? I really enjoyed the story about the skater girl, because I was Pentecostal PK, and my wife was Southern Baptist girl, and well, before we got married, and we had the conversation with her dad of the once saved always saved stuff, and I mean I was just taught, this is what it is, and you never question it. It's just what you were taught. And then the first time I met my now father-in-law, I was like 16, and we had the conversation of he was like, so if my friend who died didn't say a prayer before they died, did they go to hell? I was like, I'm 16. I'm not going to sit here and tell you your friend's in hell, but yes, from what I've been told, then I would hope that you do know more than me, given that you're a 40-year-old man. But it's crazy to assume that somebody at that age has any clue about anything. But
yeah, absolutely. I mean, it is just such a crummy situation to be in, to have the weight of people's souls on your hands, and a God constantly looking down and not being satisfied with what you're doing. It's just it's a mess, man. I really do sometimes think about how extraordinarily amazing it is, and I don't mean that in a good way, of all the billions of people in the world. I was seeing through such a narrow view. I mean, so not only was I a Christian, which does not, it's not even close to the majority of human beings, but also Pentecostal, also Church of God, and also this certain brand of Church of God, and I literally thought I was right and everybody else was wrong. Right. My view of the Bible, my view of hell, my view of God, how things work. Like, I was convinced that our way was right. And what does that mean to everybody else? I mean, my gosh. And I really do think that we're going to end up in whatever the afterlife is. I mean, I personally believe that the God of the Bible is going to be our afterlife, and I do believe that heaven and earth will come together and all things on earth will be redeemed and all of that. But I really do think that 99.9% of all there is to know is not known right now, and the amount that we know about God and understand about spirituality and life and all of that is just this just the tiniest little bit. And I think that is okay. And the little bit that maybe we are on the right track with is maybe God's grace to show us that. But I think, if you're a being that created all of this and created humans to enjoy him and creation to be enjoyed, and recognizing just how fleeting life is and how short-lived it is, I would imagine that I'd be, as God, it'd be like, okay, everything's going to be all right. These people are going through suffering. It breaks my heart, but it's just going to be for a short time, and we're all going to be together, and we've got forever to understand things and for me to make it up for them and all of that. But, I realize how senseless that sounds to people that don't believe as well, but it's kind of what I believe.
Yeah. Hey, Dan Smots here. I'm taking a second to interrupt myself talking to talk about myself because, I don't get paid a penny for the hours and hours that I put into creating this show for you guys in your greedy little ears, and I've got a family to feed. To make that happen, I run my own media business called Goulash Media. If you have a need in anything from video production to graphic design to audio production and beyond, you can get it all for a painfully fair price at Goulash Media. In video, I do weddings, music videos, commercials, pageants, plays, etc., etc., etc. For design, I do photo editing, album art, logos, branding, business cards, merchandise, you name it. For audio, I do engineering, production, editing, jingles, and, well, podcasts. So if you've got a media need of any kind, or if you'd just like to give a little something back and help keep my children fed, check out all the endless options at my website, goulashmedia.net. That's goulash, Goulash, media.net, where we cater to the little guy with the big vision. Okay. I've personally been asked multiple times, like, given the ups and downs and some of the crazy stuff that I feel like I was taught. I've had bouts with atheism and stuff like that. I do currently believe in God. I've been asked, why do you? What is there, like, how could you possibly go back to that thing? How, for you especially, like, with all the punching down that life has given you,
Right.
like, God dealt you a pretty tricky hand to work with, and you're still sticking with it. What's the reason for that?
Well, I think for me, the existence of God just makes more sense than non-existence of God. Like, as far as how everything came about in the universe, it doesn't really make a whole lot of, it makes no sense for it to have all come from nothing. And then to think of some inanimate or not inanimate, but something that is like an unconscious, impersonal force just always existing, that doesn't make sense either. So it seems like there had to have always been an intelligent being that far exceeds our understanding that was always here. That's the only thing that really makes sense. So that's a starting point. But then it's like, okay, well then who is that being? And all I can say is I really have been seeking who this is for my whole life. And so the main stuff that I camp out on are the stakes in the ground throughout my life, to where I just can't explain it any other way than saying God intervened. And I personally now can look back on the tumultuous nightmare of aspects of my childhood and teenage years and all of that, and now see the good that is coming out of it, as far as me being able to articulate things in a way that maybe other people who haven't undergone that sort of thing can't. Mm-hmm. And then also just the trajectory of my faith and outlook becoming more and more progressive. It's like I can understand, both extremes. And for me to sit here and feel sorry for myself about having some mental and spiritual heartache and turmoil, mm-hmm. I mean, let's just face it. If that's a problem, then we haven't even scratched the surface, because I know of a whole group of people who, and I'm not trying to sound, bizarre or random, but this is near and dear to my heart lately when I think about it, is the millions of people that were hauled into ships in the most unimaginably horrible conditions, and maybe even born on one of those ships, and then when they're old enough to know what's going on, they're going out into a field and working in the most horrible conditions. Their health isn't cared about or anything, and end up being a slave for 65 years and then die, and that's their whole life. Right. I mean, and you compare my life to that, and mine is a cakewalk. At least I lived in an air-conditioned house and got a free education and had Christmas presents to open on December the 25th. Right. So for me to say, wow, that's really messed up for God to allow me to go through all that, well, then we got more problems to talk about. Right.
Absolutely. I love it. Now, I don't want to ask you to tell the penis story, but I got to at least ask, Are you tired of telling the penis story?
Nah, I don't care.
I'm sure that every podcast that you're on, they're like, no,
right.
Talk about your penis.
Well, I mean, it just to me, it makes very logical sense. I mean, the snapshot is when you're a little kid and you see your dad's, you see it in such a magnificently large light. And I'm seeing that with my sons. I mean, they marvel at my penis. They're like, they literally,
I just present it in front of them on like a pedestal, and I'm like, check it out, guys. And they're like,
I mean, just simply saying, boys, get in the shower with me. You got to get clean.
Sure. Yeah.
And they're just, they have literally uttered the words, I cannot believe how big that is. And I'm telling you, just man to man, it ain't that above average. So it's just these little kids being like, I can't believe this. Well, soon, I would say in about 3 or 4 years, we're going to be beyond those years of them seeing that. So in their head, they're always going to have this larger than life conception of what mine looks like. And so for me, I don't know if it was definitely a hint of mental illness and all of that. I just kept expecting that sort of size for myself. And so then you take the fact that I was struggling with sexual sin and I felt like I had pleasured myself too early in my life. I felt like I had stunted its growth. And so I was super scared that I had messed myself up for good. And, up until even getting engaged, I was still worried. I was like, did I mess it? Is my wife really going to be upset? And so the punchline of all of this is I whipped that little boy out and showed my dad to ask him if I was all right. He said I was all right. So
they haven't spoken since.
My dad died of a heart attack right there, but I was good to go.
Yep. Heart attack of the massive size. He was just so wowed by it, right?
Yeah. There you go. There you go.
So with all the, we didn't even get into much on the depression side of things too, which is another facet to your story. But with all the OCD and the depression and the things that you're working through in life, how are you doing now? Like, is this something that you're pretty well past, or is it still something you struggle with?
The depression in general is not something that I'm completely past. I just feel like I am over time acquiring more and more tools to combat it with, some of it is just longevity of recognizing the senselessness of certain thoughts and just growing up and becoming more mature in how I view life. But then some of it is through reading books, listening to some podcasts, getting counseling, medication, and all of that. So I'm at a way healthier place now than I would say I've ever been since the early 90s, like in middle school or whatever. But there's definitely, I think that I'm the type of person that is just predisposed to that sort of thing. And so I think it will always be a struggle to some degree. And I also think that it's, when we talk about it being a chemical thing, there literally is like a chemical pattern that your brain learns, and that it takes a really long time to unlearn and for those knots to be untied. And I think that maybe I'll never completely get to the bottom of it. Yeah. Maybe I'll never be able to literally clear it off and kind of have like a fresh start. But I do strive for that, and I do recognize the importance of putting, honestly, I think mental health is probably the most important thing, period, because I really do think if you're mentally unhealthy, then your relationship with God is going to be jacked up and messed up. So I feel like it is a top priority. But yeah, I still have, but whereas I would have maybe 3 weeks of hell out of the month, and then maybe
not literal hell, like metaphorical hell, right?
Metaphorical hell, and then
don't believe in that around here.
Yeah, and then 7 days of being like kind of numb. Mm-hmm. That was my life 15 years ago or so. Now I would say maybe 4 days out of the month are pretty challenging. Sure. And then maybe 3 days out of the month I'm kind of numb. And then outside of that, I'm pretty good. Good.
Well, good. That's great to hear. Yep. What do you have? Do you have something to say to if there's somebody out there that is young Joey right now who's going through this type of thing, or who is even just who's going through like the Pentecostal beliefs and struggling with that? You said that, you feel bad for yourself at that age. If you could go back, what would you tell yourself with the mental clarity that you have now?
Yeah, I think that I would say to be careful of the narrow view that you're looking through. And if God is infinite, then at the very least, there is way more for you to understand and know, and open your heart up to that. And this is something that I will say, and you can take it or leave it, but I'm fully convinced that God made us to enjoy him. And so if that is true, which I can't think of any other reason a loving God would create us. if a loving God creates us to see what we'll do and what we'll choose, and then has some punishments lined up for the folks that mess up, I just cannot rationalize that being loving anymore. And now I also readily admit that I'm a finite human being, and maybe I'm seeing the whole thing wrong, and maybe that is how it works. I'm just not convinced of that anymore. And so I would encourage that person to really try to think outside of what you've been thinking, because right now all it's causing is pain and shame and bondage, and that can't be God's will for you. And then the other piece, maybe there's some people that really don't care about faith right now, and they struggle with bad mental health. My thing would be, if you are actively pursuing help, then that's the very least that you can do. I would just try to cover all of your bases, go after everything, healthy eating, eliminate some sugar from your diet, exercise, stretch, take fish oil, take antidepressants, get counseling, do everything you possibly can. And if you're just saying I'm depressed, there's nothing I can do, and you're not being proactive, then I hate that for you, because I really do feel like you are going to be in that as long as you'll allow yourself to be. Yeah. And that's kind of on you. It's
absolutely. Very well put. Do you see a time in your life in the foreseeable future that you could not be on the medication, or is that just an accepted thing for the time being?
It's an accepted thing for me. Now I'm certainly open to it, but I do feel at this juncture it would have to be a huge awakening in my life, from God making it abundantly clear to stop, or the discovery of some natural way that science discovers. But it would have to be a very extreme, obvious direction for me to go, because I have recently, as in the last 4 years, had to transition from one medication to the other. And so I went through a period of time where I was just completely clean of it, and I was a mess, man. We're talking OCD, very extreme. I'll never forget laying in bed, and I had like a budget app, and there was something that I wanted to check, and I checked it. And next thing I know, within 2 minutes, I had checked it probably about 14 times, and I could not stop. And my mind was just completely cluttered with, there's so much to do and I need to be doing it, but I don't know where to start. And it was just bombarded with so much to do and just all these things floating around. I mean, I don't think that I can make it without it, or at least in a healthy way. So that's just my lot. And, if it's my, maybe it's the thorn in my side that keeps me humble and that shows that I need God. And some people would say, well, if you need God, and get off the medication. But I don't, that's some bullshit, man. I don't listen to that.
God wants me to be miserable. It's my penance in life for not wearing those Christian T-shirts every day.
Right. So. And God hates doctors that create medication that can help people's mental health.
That's right. Well, above all, I really appreciate and respect your honesty and your openness. I think that, especially as a pastor, we need way, way, way more of that on your podcasts, both of them, in your book and everything else. So my hat goes off to you. I think you're doing a great job, and I really appreciate you being here, man.
Well, I appreciate it, man, and thanks for your time. Thanks for letting me be on here, and thank you so much.
Absolutely. Now, go ahead and plug your stuff. Tell everybody where they can find out all about you, your church, your podcast, your book, and everything you got going on, man.
Yeah, well, I pastor at for right now until I get fired. I pastor at Seacoast Church. You can go to seacoast.org, and I mean, if you're in the Southeast, you can maybe go visit a campus. BadChristian podcast, you can go to badchristian.com. We actually have a conference in Dallas, and so if you're in the Texas area, or if you just love this interview and you're like, I gotta hang out with him and his friends, then you can hop on an airplane, come to Dallas. And then I do a solo podcast where we really explore faith and tragedy, and with a lot of open-mindedness, and that's called Pastor with No Answers. People can go to pastorwithnoanswers.com. So.
Very cool.
The book that you're referring to, you can find it at our Bad Christian store, but I think you can also go to fundamentalistpastor.com. But yeah, you can just go to badchristian.com and find all of that.
And I think we made it through the entire episode without mentioning the name of the book until now, but it is called FundaMENTAList, Stories of a Mentally Ill, Obsessive Compulsive Legalistic Youth Group Kid Turned Pastor. So
yes, sir.
Check it out. It's fantastic. I read it, which means a lot because I don't read. But Joey, thank you so much for being here. I'd love to have you on again in the future, and especially I want to talk to you sometime about conspiracies because I know that the people you hang out with don't appreciate that very much, but we do here. So.
Awesome, man. That sounds good.
Cool. Well, you have a good one, and I'll talk to you later.
All right, you too.
Hey guys, thanks for sticking around to the end. I hope you enjoyed my conversation with Joey Svendsen as much as I did, and I really did. I wish that we could have done it longer, and I hope that we can do it again in the future because he's a great guy. He's got a great story, and I can relate a lot to a lot of the things that he says. I didn't want to, I hope I didn't, make it too much about me, but I just want to be like, I get this. And reading his book, like I could relate to so many things, not so much the mental disorders and that type of thing, but just the Pentecostal upbringing. It's fascinating to speak to people who come from that same background and have similar stories and that type of thing. So, yeah, definitely check out his stuff. Check out his book. His book's a great, easy, short read. I think it's only about 100 to 150 pages, something like that. So, I'm not much of a reader myself. Don't feel bad if you're not, because you don't have to be. It's a good, quick read, and I got a lot of enjoyment out of it, even if you can't relate to anything that he's saying. It's very entertaining the way that he crafts the stories and tells them. It's really worth looking into. So go check his stuff out. Also check out his podcasts, Bad Christian and Pastor with No Answers. All good stuff. But yeah, Christmas is coming up. It is what it is. I've actually been more seasonally accepting this year than in past years. I mean, I usually hate this time of year. I'm trying to just, get over some of my hang-ups on it and just enjoy it, just accept life sometimes. And, my personality makes me, skeptical of all the things. I have problems with the ideas of obligatory gifts, or not even obligatory, but expected gifts. I don't like that. I think defeats the purpose of gifts in general, personally. If you have to go to somebody and say, what can I buy you? You tell me what you want that I can, with no thought, go out and purchase for you in this dollar range that will make you feel love from me. I don't understand that. I don't know why we do it. I prefer random acts of giving. I think it means a whole lot more, but I'm trying to put my cynicism aside for this year, for the most part. Trying. It's tough, but I'm enjoying it. I'm enjoying family time, that type of thing. So, yeah, I'm sure you will find yourself amongst family in the coming weeks. As you do, I would encourage you to, not be afraid to get into some civil dialogue about uncomfortable topics like conspiracies, politics, or religion. I think they're all important to talk about. They're all, if you take the ego out of it, if you take yourself out of it and just converse and be open-minded, it's fun. That's why I do it. It's to learn new information and to have fun. It's not to piss people off. It's not even to make people uncomfortable. That's not the goal of the show, is to make people uncomfortable. The goal is to talk about things that are typically uncomfortable and do so in a comfortable, just chill, laid-back manner, which is what we do. So, yeah, that's my challenge to you. Also, if you wouldn't mind telling somebody about the show, sharing it around with a friend or two, that would be fantastic, and I would appreciate it from the bottom of my cold black heart. Please share, subscribe, like iTunes, Twitter, YouTube, Facebook, all the social stuff that millennials do. As I always say, or as I like to say, if you're not on these platforms, don't go join them for the sake of liking the show. But you're there. You're there. So just go click a button. I'd appreciate it. And go give it a like and a share. That'd be great. And go, please, join the Downers Club. Give me a nice Christmas gift. I would appreciate it very much, and it would brighten my my holiday spirit. If you go over to patreon.com/The System Is Down and sign up for the Downers Club for as little as $5 a month and get weekly, often, most of the time, it's multiple episodes of this show every single week that only patrons get, as a big thank you for your support. And every single dollar that you contribute, every single penny that you contribute, I'm putting back into the show. This is not my source of income. This is how I am building the show and making it look as beautiful as it is, sound as pretty as it does, and I'm hoping to do more in the coming year and make it a big splash. A big, fun, uncomfortable splash in 2019. So join the party. I mean, if for no other reason, $5 a month to get, 6, 8, sometimes 10 bonus episodes every single month. Not a bad deal, I'd say. But, yeah, thank you guys so much for listening. It's always a pleasure. And coming up next week, the next few weeks, we're going to do the same thing that we did last year, and we're going to do the Downey Awards episodes where Craig, Nathan, Cole, and I, we recap all the entertainment that we consumed this year, and we break it all down and, hand out the awards for our top 3s, our top 4s, our honorable mentions, our dishonorable mentions. We're going to talk about movies, TV series, and podcasts, musical albums, all that stuff. So it's going to be a lot of fun. It's going to be a chilled, laid back few episodes for the Christmas week and the New Year's week, because, I know that a lot of people, they're busy on those weeks and they're not going to tune in until later, but I still want to make sure that those of you who don't have things going on will get your fix of good, fun entertainment and content. So check that out next week, first thing Monday morning, and the following Monday morning for the Downey Awards. Also, check out the Anti-News, which is coming later on this week, where Craig and I recap all the headlines in the news and do so in a dark, comedic, and often offensively uncomfortable fashion. So check that out. But yeah, again, thank you guys so much for listening. It's always a pleasure. I appreciate you more than I can say, and I hope that you go out and have a wonderful week. And yeah, that's it. That's it for today. But if you'll have me, of course, I will be right back here first thing next Monday morning, comfortably nestled in your ear canal like a sleepy bear in the winter months, keeping warm for the holidays. So until then, question everything. Stay uncomfortable. Thanks. This has been a Goulash Media production. goulashmedia.net.
This concludes our broadcast day. Click.